Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
In this video, we will be learning how to auto-sum the data in one click. Right here as an example, I have a list of shops and we have to find the total sales per day. And on the very right side, we have to find the total sales per shop. For doing so, the first step is to select the whole data for which you want to do the totals. Once you've selected it, you simply click on Alt and equals to on your keyboard. Once you do that, you're going to find out that the total sales per shops and the total sales per day are there, and a total value is also there, which is the revenue generated throughout the week for all the shops. That was all for this lesson. Thank you very much. Take care.
Hi there everyone, and welcome back to another lesson. In this video, we will be learning how to flash fill data in Excel. This is a very nice trick that helps you to segregate first name and last names or any sort of data that is collective in one cell. So let's jump in and see how this is done. In front of me, I have a list of names which are having both first and last names. If you start segregating the names manually, it can take you a lot of time. Flash fill in Excel is an amazing trick to help you segregate the names. So all you have to do is, in the first cell, you add the first name of the first person. For example, I added Rick. Now, if I want that the whole column should have all the first names, I simply need to click on Control E. Once you click on it, you're going to see all the first names are listed down. Same way, you go to the second column and you type in the last name. Once that's done, click on Control E and all the last names are right here. So this was a short trick of how to flash fill data in Excel. Thanks for watching.
When working in Excel, and particularly if you're going to be sharing your spreadsheets with colleagues or other people, it's really important that you control the data that goes into the spreadsheet. And we're going to explore a couple of methods that we can use to ensure that our spreadsheets remain as error-free as possible. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you take a look at this spreadsheet just here, we have a list of employees. And in here, we can see their department and their salary. Now, if I share this spreadsheet with, let's say, 10 other people, anybody can go into this spreadsheet and start making changes to these cells. Now, that might be fine. This might be a list that you want people to keep updated, but there might be certain cells or certain parts of this worksheet that you just don't want them to touch. For example, if you take a look in column I, you can see we have a couple of NA errors in here. Now, don't worry about those too much at the moment. If we click on one of these cells, you can see that it contains an index match formula. And again, if you're not sure what an index match formula is, we're going to cover that in a couple of sections' time. All you really need to note now is that these two cells both contain formulas. Now, what I don't want to happen here is that when I send this spreadsheet to somebody else, they come into one of these cells and change this formula. Because it might be that the person who's changing it doesn't have particularly good Excel skills and they break the formula, or it might be that they accidentally touch their keyboard, drop something on their keyboard, add something into the formula, and then again it's broken. So we want to make sure that we put in as many controls as possible to ensure that things like this don't happen. Now, what we're aiming for here is in cell I3, I want to be able to type in an employee name and have it return the department and the salary. And that is basically what these index match formulas are going to do. They basically look at the name that we have in cell I3. They then look in the table, they find that name, let's say Lee Anderson, for example, and they'll return the department and the salary for that employee. So let's type in Lee Anderson just here. And when I hit enter, we should find that it returns the department that he's in and the salary because of these formulas. Now, I can see that the salary doesn't have any formatting, so let's fix that. Let's apply some accounting formatting with 2 decimal places. So that's working fine, but what if I come in here and I type in, let's go for Laurie May. and hit enter. I'm getting NA errors. Now, Laurie May does exist in the table, so why are these formulas not returning the department and the salary? Well, if I take a look at my employee names, I can see here is Laurie May, but notice that I've spelt her name wrong. So instead of an I on the end, I've used a Y. So if you have a spelling mistake in your lookup, it's not going to return the correct result. And this can reflect really badly on you, because if you go back to your manager and say, well, Laurie May doesn't exist in the table according to my formulas, when they're actually there, then that isn't really a good look. So the method that I would use to ensure that people are inputting the correct names every single time is to use a data validation drop-down list. So what we're going to do here is let's just add employee at the top, make this a bit wider, and I'm just going to use my format painter to copy that formatting because we're going to add a little data validation drop-down. So let's go to the data tab, over to data tools, we're going to choose data validation, and on the settings tab we're going to say that we want to create a list. Now the source for our list, well, we want to list all of the employee names. So I'm going to go to the first name in the employee name column, Control Shift down arrow to select the entire range and click on OK. So now I have this little drop down and I can select the names and it's correct every single time. So this really safeguards against spelling mistakes and people just entering in the wrong thing into the cell. So consider utilizing data validation lists. Now, the second thing that I'd like to show you in this lesson is how to protect individual cells. Because now we have our nice data validation drop down, our formulas underneath are working perfectly. Now, what about if I want to send this spreadsheet to other people? I want them to be able to edit the employee details down here and add new employees onto the bottom. I also want them to be able to make selections from this drop down, but I don't want them to be able to click in either of these two cells and start changing the formula. So what I can do here is I can protect these two cells that contain those formulas and leave everything else unprotected. Now, protection, I always think works a little bit backwards. And the principle you need to get your head around is that every cell in Excel by default is locked. Now, you might be thinking, well, if every cell is locked, how can I just type into any cell? And if you don't believe me, let's right click on a cell. Let's go to Format Cells and the Protection tab. Notice the locked checkbox is selected. And you'll find that no matter what cell you click in your spreadsheet. Now, the reason why we can still type into locked cells is that this locking doesn't take effect until we protect the worksheet. So until then, everything is still unlocked. So if we want to make certain cells editable and other ones locked, what I would do here is I would select all of the cells that I want people to be able to change. So I'm going to say Control Shift down arrow. I also want them to be able to use that drop down. Then I'm going to right click, go to Format Cells, and we're going to unlock those cells. Let's click on OK. So now when I go up to the Review tab, I'm going to say Protect Sheet. I'm not going to use a password. Let's click on OK. And now what we'll find is that these cells are still editable. So if I go down here, I could change this to sales, not a problem. But if I try and make any changes to these two cells where we have the formulas, I'm going to get an error message. It says the cell or chart you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. So these two cells are protected or locked, and everything else where I need to make changes, all of those cells are editable.
Hi there everyone and welcome back to another lesson. In this video, we will be learning the different methods of deleting empty rows in Microsoft Excel. So let's get started. The very first method that you people already know conventionally is to simply go to the row, select any cell and right-click, go to delete and simply delete the entire row. This is something conventional that you have been doing before. But this time, I'm going to introduce you two different methods which are unique and easy to follow for deleting empty rows. The very first way is to add filters for deleting the empty rows in Microsoft Excel. In order to do that, it is extremely necessary that you select the data which contains the empty rows. In this case, I will select this whole table, which includes the data for employee name, ID number, and product sold. Once I've selected this data, as you can see, there are row number 11, 13, 16, and 17, which are empty and need to be deleted. I would simply press Ctrl-Shift-L on my keyboard to allow the filters for each of these columns. As you can see, as soon as I pressed Ctrl-Shift-L, these drop-downs appeared. These drop-downs are the filters for each column. They will help me in order to delete the empty rows. Let's look at how it's going to be done. I'll simply click on one of them, and once I do that, I'm going to see the text filters. Right here, the whole data that's available is selected, but I will uncheck it and then drag down to the last. In last, in brackets, you can see there's an option of blank. I am going to tick mark it and then press OK. As soon as I did it, you can see rest of the data is all filtered. It's no longer there except for the empty rows in this particular selected area. Once I'm done with it, I will particularly select those rows which are highlighted blue in this case, right-click, go to Delete Row. It will ask me if I have to delete entire sheet row, so I'll select OK. And once that's done, you are clear of the empty rows. Now, in order to retrieve back the data, we will simply click on this filter button, go to the text filters, and then checkmark Select All. Once you do that, you will see that there are only names mentioned and no option of blanks anymore. That is because we have already deleted the empty rows in that particularly selected data. You will click on OK, and the data is back. Now we only have the data which is available without empty rows. So that is how you can use one simple method of using filters and delete the empty rows in Excel. The second easy to follow method for deleting the empty rows in Excel is to use the Go To option using Ctrl-G. Remember, it is always necessary to select that particular data you want to delete because we have hundreds and thousands of different rows in each sheet in Excel and we would not want to delete the rest of them. So my first step will be selecting the data with empty rows in between again. Then I will press Ctrl-G on my keyboard, go to the special option, select blanks, and hit OK. Once I do that, you will see that that particular row, which is entirely empty, is selected. Now I simply need to right-click, go to Delete, and then it asks me whether I want to shift the cells up, shift the cells left, and delete entire row or column. For this case, we're going to delete the entire row. We're going to click OK, and you will see how simply we have deleted all the irrelevant rows in Microsoft Excel. And now the data is all clear and you do not have that extra space which causes your table to look uneven. So that was how you simply can use these two methods for deleting empty rows in Excel. I hope that these two methods will prove helpful and help you out in managing your pivot tables, your charts, and any sort of data in Microsoft Excel. See you in the next lesson. Thank you very much.
Hi there everyone and welcome back to another lesson. In this video, we will be learning how to highlight checkboxes in Excel. So let's jump in and see how can we do this highlighting. So the first thing is going to be selecting the cells which are having checkboxes. In this case, all of these checkboxes are unticked. So I'm going to go and color them red. If you want that every time you tick the box and the statement changes to true, the color of this certain cell should change to green. First of all, go to the cell where you want this changing to be applied, go to Conditional Formatting, New Rule, and click on Use a Formula to determine which cells to format. Right over here, we're going to go, put our cursor, go to the option of False, and once the formula appears, put equals to true. Now go to Format, Fill, change the color to green, click on OK. This time, when I click on True, you're going to see that the color of the box changed. If I uncheck it, it's going to change to false again. This way, you can do the same changing to all of the rest of the cells so that whenever you check the cell, it becomes true, the color changes to green, and when you uncheck, all of the formatting is undone. If you want the same formatting for all of the cells, you will have to go to Conditional Formatting, Manage Rules, and over here, double-click on the formula. Once you double-click, we're going to remove this $sign, which is behind 6. The reason for doing this is so that every time the formula is applied, we don't have the same cell locked, and the cell positioning keeps changing as you go down the column. We're going to click on OK. Over here, we're going to select all of those cells where we want the certain formula to be applied. Click on Apply. Go here, select this worksheet, and OK. Now, every time I check or uncheck a box, you're going to see that there is going to be the formatting happening separately. Thanks for watching.
We're going to take a look at how we can split data in Excel. And having the ability to split data up is a really important skill to learn. And it's something that comes up so frequently. Now, there are multiple different ways in Excel that you can do this. And we're going to start out in this lesson by taking a look at the oldest method, and that is text to columns. So let's take a look at our first example. Now notice over here in column A, I have a little bit of information that's been imported in from an external system. Now we only have a few records. This might be tens of thousands of rows long, but this is how the data has been imported into Excel. You can see that we have multiple pieces of information contained within the same cell. So we have the employee name, then a comma, then we have their job title, then a comma, then their department, then a comma, and then their salary. Now, my boss has come to me and he said, I don't like the way this report is structured. Instead of having all of the information contained within one cell, because it's really hard to read and analyze, I want you to go in and break this data up into different columns. So we want one column that shows the employee name, one column that shows the job title, one that shows the department, and one that shows the salary. Now, as I mentioned, there are numerous different methods that you can use to do this, but text to columns, whilst an older method, is still very valid. So all we would need to do here is select the data that we want to split up, go to the Data tab, and in the Data Tools group, we have a big old text to columns button. Now, if we click on text to columns, it's going to open up this little text to columns wizard. And the first thing we need to tell Excel is how our data is separated. So notice here that each field in my data is separated by a comma, not a comma space, just a comma. Now, when we have a little character like this, so this might be a comma, it could be a space, it could be a tab, it could be a semicolon, we refer to those as delimiters. So when we're choosing our data type, we want to split the data based on the delimiter. So we're going to select this top option and click on Next. We then move on to step 2, where it allows us to specify what our delimiter is that's splitting up each piece of information. Now, the default is tab, and you can see in the data preview, if I keep tab selected, it's not going to split those columns. And that's because we have a comma instead. So I'm going to deselect tab and we're going to choose comma. Now, if you had your data being separated using a delimiter that isn't one of these 4, you could choose the other option and simply type it in. Now that I've selected comma, notice in the data preview, it's now actually splitting those columns at the correct point. We can then click on Next. And if we want to choose our column data format, we can go through each column and choose that from here. Now, there are some occasions where I might do this. For example, I might specify that this is text, and this is text, and this is also text, and this one is just general. We can then choose our destination cell. So currently, if I was just to click on Finish just here, you can see the destination is cell A4. So it means it's going to start breaking up the columns in cell A4. Now, I don't want it to do that. I actually want it to split over in this little table that runs from column C to F. So I'm going to click the little up arrow and I'm just going to select cell C4 instead, and then click on Finish. And check it out, like magic, it has split up that data without too many problems. Of course, you might have to go in and maybe reapply some formatting, so let's apply some currency formatting just there. But really nice and straightforward. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's fine, but what if the delimiter that separates each of these pieces of information is inconsistent? Maybe we have a comma, and then maybe we have a semicolon or something like that. Well, in a few lessons' time, I'm going to show you one of the newer Excel functions which allows us to deal with that very nicely. For the time being, let's take a look at one more example using text to columns. Now, this dataset should look reasonably familiar. It's the one that we imported. But I have made a little change to this just to illustrate text to columns again. Notice in column A, instead of just housing the information for the country, it also has the product in brackets after it. Now, ideally, you don't want to have two pieces of information in the same column. Instead, I'd want a country column and also a product column. So we're going to split this up using text to columns. Now, to do this, I want to add in another column, Control-Shift+ or Control+, depending on your keyboard, because I need to have room for all of my products to be listed in here. So now that we've done that, I'm going to select my data, Control-Shift down arrow, and I'm going to do Control backspace to jump back up to the top. We're going to go to the Data tab. I'm going to choose Text to Columns. Now I'm going to choose Delimited again, because what are we going to use to separate our data? Well, I'm going to use the first open bracket just here. So we're going to choose Delimited, click on Next, and we don't have brackets listed underneath our delimiters. So this is where we can use the other option, and we can just say that we want to split at that first open bracket. Let's click on Next. Now the final thing to define here is the destination. So currently it's going to split this into cell A2. Now in this case it's fine because I want the country to be in cell A2 and then I want the product to be in cell B2. So let's just leave it on A2, click on Finish. It's recognizing that there's already data in column A. It's fine. I want to overwrite that with just the country. Let's click on OK, and you can see it splits that up really nicely. Now notice something just here. When we split at the first open bracket, it actually deletes that first open bracket during the split process, but it's left this trailing open bracket. So I want to remove the bracket from column B, and this is simply a case of using Find and Replace. So we can select the column, Control F. We're going to go to the Replace tab and we're going to say find the closing bracket and replace it with nothing. So let's choose Replace All, and that's a really quick way of just getting rid of that. We can then simply add our column header, which is Product, and we've split up our data using text to columns extremely quickly. We're going to move on and start to take a look at how we can import data and work with that data. And in this lesson, we're simply going to take a look at some of the options we have when it comes to importing data from external sources. Now you can see on the screen here, I've got a text file open. And this is just a notepad file. You can see it's called salesdata.txt. And this contains some data that you typically might find in maybe an external sales system, and maybe it's your job each week to get this data into Excel so that it can be manipulated and analyzed. So we're going to use this text file as our example. We want to import all of this information into an Excel spreadsheet. So let's close it down, and we're just going to start from a blank Excel workbook. Now, when it comes to importing data, there are a few different methods you can use, but if you already have Excel open, if you go to the Data tab, notice that you have a group called Get and Transform Data. And we have numerous different sources for our data. So it might be that you want to import data from the web, or maybe from a table or a range that exists in another Excel document. You can even import data from pictures. So if you have a picture of something, you can import from the picture. Now, if we click the drop down underneath Get Data, this is where we're going to find the full list of different import sources. So you can see here from File, we can import from an Excel workbook, from a text file, from XML, even from a PDF file. Now we're importing from a text file. So I'm going to choose this option just here, from text CSV. And you can see in the screen tip it says import data from a text, comma separated value or formatted text file. So that sounds like what we want. Let's click it. The next thing to do is simply navigate to where you've saved this file. Now you'll find the sales data text file in the course files folder, so make sure that you have that downloaded and stored somewhere safe. So I'm going to select salesdata.txt and just simply click on the import button. Now what that's going to do is effectively it's going to open up Power Query. And if you've used Power Query before, then you'll know that Power Query is a tool that we have within Excel that allows us to transform data, effectively tidy up and clean our data before we import it into Excel. Now it's worth noting that you can use Excel's native functions to clean up data as well, which is what we're going to do for the first few lessons of this section. I'll then show you at the end how you can transform data using Power Query. So what you're actually seeing here is a representation of the data in that text file. And notice at the top here where we have delimiter, it says tab. So in my text file, each of the columns were effectively separated using a tab delimiter. And you can see that it's actually picked that up and it's split those columns up based on the position of that tab. And I'm getting a preview of the first 200 rows of my data set. Now, if you take a look at this data, you can see here we've got some rows with null values. That means that they're blank rows. I can see we have some inconsistencies in terms of case in the product column, and there's probably some other formatting things that I'm going to need to do to this data set. Now at this stage, I could go to the bottom and click on Transform Data. That's going to open up Power Query and allow me to do things like remove blank rows or change the case or apply number formatting. Now, as I said, we're not going to use Power Query in the first few lessons of this course because I want to showcase to you some of the functions that you have for cleaning data. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to go down to the Load button and we're just going to say Load. And what that will do is it will just load that data into a spreadsheet and it will convert it into an Excel table. Notice at the top here we now have the table design ribbon and also a query ribbon as well. Because effectively when you import data, you're creating a connection to that data. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and change the table style to something a little bit nicer. Let's go for this dark green. And for the time being, I'm going to close down queries and connections. Now, obviously, we have some things that we need to tidy up in this data set to make it ready for analysis. And we're going to be covering that in the next few lessons. But when it comes to importing data in, it's really as simple as that. Just go to the Data tab and choose your import source from the Get and Transform Data group. In this lesson, we're going to explore the filter function. And much like sort and sort by that we've looked at previously, filter is a dynamic array function, meaning that it has that spill behavior. We type the formula into one cell and the results spill down to the other cells. Now, the reasons for using the filter formula as opposed to just putting some filters on the top of your columns are pretty much similar to the reasons why we use sort and sort by. For example, if I click in this table, let's just add our filter drop downs to the top. I can go in and I can click the drop down and I can choose to filter my list by whichever subject I like. So maybe I'm only interested in the results for French and history. I can select those and my list will be filtered. Now, the disadvantage of using this method is that your filtered results are always going to be in the same location. So they're always going to be in columns A to D in this example. I'm also very limited with what I can do from here. So once I've applied my filters, I have a few different things I can do. I can select different things, I can employ text filters, but apart from that, there isn't a great deal else I can do with this filter option. Whereas if we use the filter function, our results immediately become dynamic, meaning that if anything changes in the original data set, the filter is going to update. Using a formula means that we can combine it with other formulas to make it more powerful, and it also means that we can output our filter results to any cell in the workbook. So let's take a look at how filter works. Now I've got a small data set again over here. This is the data set we've been using in a few lessons. In the middle I have what I want to filter by, and then I want my output to be over here. Now notice I've already added in the column headings because I want to return all of the columns. It's worth noting that when you're using the filter function, you don't necessarily have to return all of the information from all of the columns. If you are only interested in the student, the exam and the mark, maybe you don't care which block they're located in, you would just use this as your filter array as opposed to everything. So let's type equals filter, open a bracket. Now we have 3 arguments here. The last one is optional. The first argument is array. So that's what I was just referring to. This is going to be the data that you actually want to filter. Now I want to filter everything, so I'm going to select the entire array. Control Shift down arrow, comma. We can then decide what we want to include. Now notice in the middle here I have a filter. So I want to filter this list so that I only see the results related to students who sat the English exam. So for this include argument, I want to include when the exam, Control Shift down arrow, we want to select that range, is equal to whatever we have in this cell, because I could change this to something else to get a different set of results. Now that's all we're going to do here. We're going to close the bracket, hit enter, and you can see that's exactly what I get. I'm now only seeing the results related to students that sat the English exam. Now take a look at the first result for student Adam, who's located in the North block. So here he is in the original source data. If I change his exam to, let's say, French, notice how our results automatically update. Let's hit enter. Adam disappears from our filtered list. And of course, because we're using a cell reference to define our filter, if I change this to something else, so let's go for maths and hit enter, everything is going to update. So it's nice and dynamic. And of course, you could put this in a data validation drop-down list so you don't have to keep typing in the exam each and every time. Let's move on to another more complicated example now, where we're using multiple criteria. So this time we have very similar data, but we have 2 filters that we want to use. So I want to filter for all students who sat the English exam who are located in the West block. So we have 2 pieces of criteria. How does filter deal with that? Well, again, we need to select our array that we want to filter, Control Shift down arrow, comma. Now we want to define what we want to include. Now, if you have more than one piece of criteria, you need to enclose each criteria within brackets. So I'm going to open a bracket and we're going to say include when the exam is equal to what we have in this cell. Close the bracket. That's our first piece of criteria. Now we need to add in an operator to let Excel know what we want to do. So are we doing an and? Are we doing an or? So if I want to filter this list, wherever the exam is equal to English and the block equals West, we need an asterisk separating our criteria. That means and. We can then open the next bracket and define our next piece of criteria. So this time we want to include when the block, Control Shift down arrow, is equal to whatever we have in cell F8. Close the bracket. Now if I had more pieces of criteria, I could carry on going. I could do an asterisk, I can open a bracket, and I can carry on. We're going to leave it like that. Let's press comma and take a look at this last optional argument. So this is what we want Excel to return if it can't find anything that matches in the data. So I'm just going to say no records. Close the bracket, hit enter, and you can see now we just have the results of the English exam for students located in the West block. And if this changes to, let's say, French, and let's change the block to East, you can see everything dynamically updates. And once again, you could put these on data validation drop-down lists to make it even easier. Now, it's worth noting that the AND logic isn't the only logic that we can use here. We can also use OR logic instead. So the asterisk implies and. If we were to change this to a plus, we're now using OR logic. So let's hit enter and we get a much longer list of results, which is what I would expect, because here we're saying filter for all the records where the exam is equal to French or the block is East. So everything you see in here, the exam will either be French or the block will equal East. Let's take a look at our final example. Now this is where we combine filter with another formula. I did briefly mention this when we were taking a look at sort. I said we'd be coming back to this so you can see how these work together. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to do a filter with a sort. So once again I have the same data set, but this time I have 3 pieces of criteria that I want to filter by. So let's do our filter first of all, and then we'll deal with the sort. The array that we want to filter, well, I want to filter everything, comma, what do I want to include? Well, our first piece of criteria, remember, needs to go in brackets, is we want to include when the exam is equal to what we have in here, cell F5. Close the bracket. We're going to do an and, so we need an asterisk in here, open a bracket. Our next piece of criteria is that we want the block to equal what we have in cell F8. Close that off, and another asterisk, open. We want to include when the mark, this time we want to include when it's greater than 50, or what we have in cell F11. Let's close off our final piece of criteria, and I'm going to say that if it can't find anything, we just want no records in the cell. Let's close off our filter and hit enter and check out the results that we get. Now, of course, we can easily check that this is correct by using our filters. So let's filter for English, West, and greater than 50. So I'm going to say we want to see all the results for English, all the results for the West block that are greater than 50, and that is all of these. And if you recall, that is exactly what we were getting in our filter results. Remember, if I was to change these to pluses, so I could put a plus in here, I could put a plus in here, when we press enter, we're going to get a much longer list because we're doing an OR. Now, whenever we have our results of our filter, we can then combine it with sort to sort our results. So all I would need to do here is I can use sort or sort by. If I go up to the beginning of filter and type in sort, the array is being generated by the filter formula. So we can just jump to the end, press comma, and then we can choose the columns that we want to sort by. So maybe I want to sort by the pass marks, that's column number 4. I want to sort in descending order, and I want to sort by row, so we want a false on the end. Close the bracket, hit enter, and that's exactly what I get, a nice filtered list. And everything is completely dynamic. So if we change this to French, for example, I'm going to get a different set of results. If I change this to South, we get a different set of results. And if I change this to, let's put that up to over 80, I get a different set of results. So everything dynamically updates. So hopefully you can see there how awesome the filter function is, particularly when combined with other functions. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can use lookup functions to perform a two-way lookup, or a lookup with multiple criteria. Now you can see here that we have a table. We have some months running across the top, so January to December, and then we have some travel companies listed in column B. And then in the middle here, we have all of the revenue generated for each month by each of these travel companies. Now what we want to do in the little table above is we want to be able to select a month from a drop-down list, select a company from the drop-down list, and have it pick out of this table the sales value. For example, if I select the month of January and the company Footsteps, I want it to return this value just here. Now this requires us to do a two-way lookup because we have two pieces of criteria that we're looking up in order to find the result. We need to look up the month and then we need to look up the company. Now I will say that you can do this using index and match or XLOOKUP. So whichever you prefer, you should use. Now I'm going to use XLOOKUP in this particular example because I just find it a little bit easier. Now before we do any of that, we need to set up our data validation drop-down lists, and we need one for month and one for company. So let's jump up to the Data tab into Data Validation. We need a list. And the source for our list is going to be this selection just here. So basically all of the months. Let's click on OK. And there we go. There we have our little list. Let's do the same for the company. So we're going to go into Data Validation. We want to create a list. And the source this time is going to be the company names. Let's click on OK. And now we can select them from here. So now we need to use these two cells in order to build up our lookup with multiple criteria. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to use XLOOKUP. So let's type it in. Now, lookup value. We effectively have two lookup values. So we're going to go for the first one first. So let's go for this one. We're going to look up the month, comma, lookup array. Where are we going to find the month? Well, we're going to find the month in this array just here, C8 to N8, comma. The next argument is return array. Now, instead of selecting our return array, we're going to go straight into another XLOOKUP. And this is where we're going to define our second piece of criteria. So our lookup value is going to be the company, comma. Where are we going to find it? Where is our lookup array? Well, we're going to find it in this range of cells, comma. Now we can define our return array. Now our return array is basically where are we going to find our answer? Now our answer could be anywhere in this table depending on the month and the company that we've selected. So we need to select all of the values in the table as our return array. Now those are our mandatory arguments. Of course, you could go through the rest of them and specify if not found text, the match mode and the search mode. We're not going to do that. We're going to stick with the three mandatory arguments. Let's close off our first XLOOKUP, close off our second, hit enter, and we get a result. So let's check to see if this is correct. We're going to go across to May and footsteps. So let me just highlight this so you can see it a bit easier, 32,868. And if you check out the result that we've got, if I put comma formatting in here, you can see that yes, that is exactly the same. What about if we change these drop downs? Let's go for August and let's go for Go Explore. So this time we're looking in the top row at the August value, which is this one just here, 28,916, and that's exactly what we have in cell D5. So this is working perfectly. Now let's take a look at what this would look like if we were using index and match. So we're going to type in index. Now our array is where we're going to find our answer. So our answer could be anywhere in here, comma. Now we want the row number. Now notice here for index we have two arguments, row number and column num. Now most of the time we're only ever using the row number column. But when we're doing a lookup with multiple criteria, we actually utilize both the row number argument and the column number argument. So the row number argument, we're going to be doing a match. Our lookup value is going to be the company because the company is in the rows and we're doing the row number argument, comma. Where are we going to find it? Well, we're going to find it just here, comma. Match type, we want to do an exact match. Close it off, comma. Now we're into our column number argument. So this is where we can go straight into another match. This time our lookup value is the month. Where are we going to look it up? Well, we're going to look it up in this range just here, and we want to do an exact match of the month. Let's close off match, close off index, hit enter, and let's see what we get. So August, Go Explore. Again, we're at the top here, and if I highlight the value, you can see that it matches. What about if we change these? Let's go for May, and we're going to go for Flight Shop just here. So Flight Shop is the bottom one. May, there is the total, and you can see that it's working. So this is a little bit more of a complex formula, but when you break it down, it's actually pretty easy. The first range that we're selecting here is the range of cells that contains our answer, so all of the numbers. And then we're just doing a match for the row number and a match for the column number. So that's how you can perform a lookup with multiple criteria using both XLOOKUP and index and match.
Hi, from everyone at Simon Says It. We hope you're enjoying this training lesson. please like this video to show your support for the channel. If you want to take your learning further, earn a certificate for this course, and gain access to over 200 courses ad-free, click up there and go to simonsaysit.com. Thanks for watching, and back to the course.
Now we have another lookup function called HLOOKUP. And as you might imagine, the H stands for horizontal. So the difference between HLOOKUP and VLOOKUP is that you use one if your data is organized vertically and the other if your data is organized horizontally. Now, the format that most data is in is vertical. For example, this data set that you can see on this worksheet, this is vertical data. It's where we have our column headings running across the top here, and then we have our rows or our records. And this is by far the most common. But occasionally you will come across a spreadsheet where the data is organized horizontally. So let me show you what that looks like. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this data set and I'm going to flip it around the other way. So this is also a good opportunity for you to see how to transpose data, which effectively will change the layout. So I'm going to click in my data, Control A to select everything. I'm going to press Control C to copy. I'm just going to go underneath this table, click in a cell, and then I'm going to transpose this data. Now, if we go up to the lower half of the paste button and open up Paste Special, this is where we have our transpose feature. Now, if I click on this and click on OK, it's going to flip that data the other way around. So now you'll notice that we have the column headings in the rows as opposed to in the columns. So we have our titles of our movies running across the row, the year running across the row, so on and so forth. Now, if I wanted to perform a lookup using data that was organized like this, I would need to use HLOOKUP. Because when we use a VLOOKUP, the third argument is the column reference number. So it's asking us to specify the column that we want to return. Now, with HLOOKUP, we need to specify the row that we want to return as opposed to the column. So let's take a look at what that would look like. I'm going to jump across to the HLOOKUP worksheet. And what I want to be able to do here is select a movie from the drop-down list and have it return the year, what it's rated, and the genre. So we're going to start out by creating a data validation drop-down. So let's go to data, click the drop-down next to data validation and choose data validation from the menu. We want to create a list, and my source for the list I'm going to find on the movie database worksheet, and I'm going to choose the titles of all of the movies. Click on OK. So now I should find that I have a drop-down list that contains all of those movie names, and I can use this to select whichever movie I'm interested in looking at. So now I want to construct an HLOOKUP formula. So let's type in HLOOKUP. And what you'll notice is that the arguments are pretty much exactly the same as when we're using VLOOKUP, except the third argument here is row index number as opposed to col index number. So our lookup value is going to be the film that we select in cell B5, comma, the table array. Now, I haven't named my table. So what I would need to do here is jump across to Movie Database, go down to here and select the entire table. Now, of course, I can do that, but it's quite a long table, so I'm going to come out of here. Instead of creating a table, I'm going to turn this into a range. So let's click Control A. I'm going to go up to the name box just here, and I'm going to give this range of cells a name. And we're going to call this movies and hit enter, because you can use named ranges in lookup formulas as well. So let's go back to our HLOOKUP. Our lookup value is the movie name. The table array, well, I want to use the range that I just created. Now I could start to type in the name of the range. You can see there it is, movies. Alternatively, if you can't remember what you called it, you can press the F3 key and it will show you any named ranges you have in your workbook. So I'm going to select movies. Let's click on OK. Row index number. What row do I want to return? Well, I want to return the year. I can't remember which row that is. Let's quickly jump back across and have a look. So the year is row 2. Let's go back to our formula. Now I'm going to get rid of that HLOOKUP. And we're going to say We want to return the second row, and then we can do an exact or an approximate match. Now I want to exactly match the film name in that range of cells, so we want a false on the end here or 0. Let's hit return, and you can see it's returned the year 2016. And if we change the movie name, so let's do something at the top here, La La Land, again that's 2016. Let's check it in the movie database, La La Land, and the year is 2016. Now, with these formulas, you can't necessarily copy these down. You're going to get some NA errors. Because if we take a look at this formula, we can see that it's looking up cell B6, which is currently blank, in the movies table, and it's trying to return row 2 again. So this isn't correct. So if we escape out of there, I could make this a little bit better by locking the cell reference B5 in the formula so it doesn't move. So let's do that. Let's press F4. Hit enter. Now it's still not going to work properly because it's returning row number 2 every single time. But I could simply go in, edit these formulas and change the row. So we're looking for rated and genre. So rated is row 3 and genre is row 6. So I'm very quickly just going to come into this formula. We'll update this row number to 3 and we'll update this row number to 6. So now when I change this to something else, we get all of the results that we're looking for. So that's the difference between VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. It really does just relate to the way you have your data organized on your page. When you're working with the distinct formula, there are 2 things it can return: unique values or distinct values. So what exactly is the difference between those 2? Well, that's what we're going to explore in this lesson. And again, we're keeping our dataset very simple for these examples, so everything is really easy to understand. I have a list of countries just here, and we have the population of each of those countries in millions. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to make this dynamic. So if more countries are added onto the bottom, everything will automatically update. So let's press Control T. Yes, my table has headers. Let's click on OK. And I don't like that table style. Let's just have no table style in there. And I'm going to name my table. Let's call this country_pop. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a unique that returns distinct values. And it is worth noting that the distinct option is the default for the unique function. Now let's construct a formula that returns the distinct countries. And it is worth noting that distinct is the default. So if we type in unique, let's select our array because we want a distinct list of the countries, comma. Now we move into our optional arguments. And the first optional argument is by col. So we need to tell Excel if we want to return unique columns or unique rows. Now we want to return unique rows because our countries are listed in the rows. So we need a false in there. And then the final option, this is where we're defining if this is a distinct or a unique formula. Now we haven't really discussed what the difference is between these two, so this seems like a good point to do that. What distinct means is that it will return a list of all of the distinct items. So pretty much like when we did the first unique, it's just going to look at our list of countries and just return one of each. That's a distinct list. Whereas unique will return only the countries that appear once in our selected range. So that's the difference between the two. Now we're doing distinct in this example, so we also need a false on the end there. And what you'll find is if we close the bracket and hit enter, we're going to get what we got in the last lesson when we just did unique without any of the additional arguments. And that is because distinct is the default, so this is exactly the same. We have 9 distinct countries. Now let's take a look at the difference if we use the other argument. So we're going to do unique again. We're going to select the same array. We're returning unique rows, so we need a false. But this time we're going to say true. Return items that appear exactly once. So if we have true as our argument on the end here, the list is completely different. And that's because now it's only returning items that appear exactly once in this list. So Australia is in here only once. New Zealand, South Africa and Brazil, those aren't repeated at all throughout the selected range. And just to finish up so you can see how this works when we have new countries added to the table, I'm going to click at the bottom here and let's add in, we're going to go for Spain. Now check out what happens to both of these lists when I press tab. You can see that Spain has been added to the bottom of both of them. It's added to distinct because it's another distinct country, and it's also added to unique because Spain currently appears only once in the table. But if I was to add another entry, and let's do Spain again, you'll see that it disappears from the unique list, but it still stays in the distinct list. So hopefully that illustrates to you the difference between these two. Both of them equally as useful in different situations. Now, when it comes to creating pivot tables, there are two places you can go on the ribbon. Go to the Insert ribbon, and notice we have a Pivot Table button just here. Or alternatively, on the Table Design ribbon, we have a Summarize with Pivot Table button. Now I'm going to go back to the Insert ribbon because I just want to highlight another little option that we have here, and that is Recommended Pivot Tables. Now, Recommended Pivot Tables is really useful if maybe you're not quite as confident creating pivot tables from scratch. If we click this button, what Excel is going to do is open up a pane on the right hand side, and it's going to take a look at our data and then suggest some pivot table report layouts. So it's suggesting to me different types of analysis I could do with this data. So you can see here the first one at the top is profit by country, unit price and product. So it's going to list the countries out, the product, and then show me the total of the price. Alternatively, we could summarize by profit, gross sales by month name. So there we can see the month names, the sum of the profit, and the sum of the gross sales. Now notice under each of these, if I did decide that I wanted to use one of these, I could insert into a new sheet or an existing sheet. So if I click on New Sheet just here, you can see it's going to place that into a brand new worksheet. And we now have a base to start working from. Now in this case, we don't want to do this summary, so I am going to delete out this worksheet and close down this pane. But just remember that Recommended Pivot Tables is there available to you on the Insert ribbon. What we're going to do is create a pivot table from scratch because that's really going to help us understand how pivot tables work. Now notice here we have a little drop down underneath pivot table because there are numerous different data sources that we could create a pivot table from. Now we're creating as from a table or a range that's already in our worksheet. It's this one just here. So we're going to use this first option. But it's worth noting that we could also choose to create a pivot table from an external data source. So maybe you have a data set saved off into another Excel file, or maybe you want to create a pivot table from data that you have in a text file, something like that. So you can explore option number 2. And then finally, we could use Power BI to create our pivot tables. Now, this is way outside the scope of this course, so we're not going to touch on that at all. What we're going to do is choose from table range, and it's going to pop open this little window just here. So the first thing it's going to ask us to select is the table or range that we want to use in our pivot table report. Now notice that it's already picked up my table that I named sales data. And if you take a look around the outside of the dataset, you can see these marching ants just highlighting the range that it's going to use. We then need to choose where we want the pivot table to be placed, on a new worksheet or on an existing worksheet. Now, something I always recommend to people is that you keep your data source and any pivot table reports and charts that you create on separate worksheets. If I was to put my pivot table report to the side of this data set, it all just gets a little bit messy and complicated. So I always choose New Worksheet. Let's click on OK. Now what's going to happen here is it's going to create a new sheet. You can see it's called Sheet 1 at the bottom, and we have a blank pivot table report. It hasn't got anything in it as yet. But also notice on the right hand side we have a pane open up, and remember you can pick up this pane and drag it over here if that's a little bit easier for you. This is a resizable pane, that we can just drag out to make a little bit larger. We can also drag these areas up and down to see more or less of these fields. And if you want to drag this back and dock it, you can simply just drag it over to the right-hand side and it will snap into place. Now, what we can see in this pivot table fields area are all of the fields from our data source. So these are effectively all of the column headings from our original data source over here. So everything that we have in row 1. And then underneath where we have our pivot table fields, we have 4 areas: filters, columns, rows, and values. And the idea behind a pivot table is that we can grab any of these fields and drag them down into one of these 4 rows to build our pivot table report. So let's do something really basic first of all. I'm going to grab the region field and I'm going to drop it down into rows. Notice what happens when I let go. It's going to pick all of the regions, and this is a unique list of the regions, out of the data source and put them into the rows in the pivot table. I could then grab the product field and drop it into columns, and it's going to list all those products across the top. I can then choose what I want to summarize by. So what information am I interested in seeing? Maybe I want to see a summary of the gross sales. Let's try that first of all. I'm going to grab the gross sales field and drop that down into values. And we can now very quickly see the gross sales by region and by product. If I was just interested in seeing the gross sales by region, I can remove product from columns simply by dragging it outside. So if my boss comes to me and says he wants to know what the gross sales total is for the European region, it's really easy for me to see. Also notice we have a filters area down here, so maybe instead of dragging product to columns, I put product in the filters area. What that's going to do is add a little drop down at the top here, so if I'm interested in specific products, I can just select them from the list. And if I want to select multiple items, I have a little checkbox just here. I can say I'm only interested in seeing the gross sales by region for these 2 products. Click on OK, and the sum of the gross sales will update. Once again, if we want to remove that, we can simply drag the field out of filters. Another thing to notice is that when we're clicked in our pivot table report, we get 2 additional ribbons: Pivot Table Analyze and Pivot Table Design. So these ribbons contain all of the commands, all of the features that we're going to need to really make our pivot table report come alive. But that's how you create a very basic pivot table.
Hi there everyone, and welcome back to another lesson. In this video, we will be learning how we can insert a search bar in Excel in order to search for any sort of name, data from a given list of names and worksheet. Let's get into how to do that. The very first step is that in order to insert a search bar, you need a developer tab, which you can see right here. In case you have Excel, which you have not been using a lot and you do not have it visible, so do not panic, do not worry. In order to enable this tab, you will right-click on the ribbon and go to Customize Ribbon. As soon as you press Customize Ribbon, you will have this dialog box here. On the right-hand side, under the Mains tab heading, you're going to see the option of Developer. You have to ensure that it is check-marked tick so that it is visible on the ribbon in Microsoft Excel. Once this is done, you're going to press OK and the job is done. The very important second step is using this developer tool in order to insert a search bar just like this, in which I can type any name. Let's say I type the name Ben inside, and then I deselect the cell, and you're going to see that all of the data, all of the rows which has the name Ben will be highlighted. Let me give you another example. I search, let's say, the word Mark. You're going to see all of the joining dates, all of the rows which have that particular name are highlighted. This can quickly help you out in finding the data which you would take years or maybe a very long time to find. Now we're going to see how we're going to insert it. Here I have my data which is not conditioned, which is not formulated, or there's no function in the basis of this certain data. The very first thing is I will go to Insert tab. In Insert, I will add shape. I particularly prefer adding a rectangle which is having rounded corners. In this case, I'm adding this one. The size of the search bar is entirely optional. The formatting is entirely optional. Whatever you want, you can do that. After I have inserted this particular box right here, I am going to go to the Developer tab, and then in the sections of controls, we have two different options. One is the insert, the other is design mode. We don't have to be in design mode yet. We'll first of all go to insert. After pressing, you see there are form controls and active X controls. In active X controls, there is a text box active X control. You will simply press it and you're going to see how your cursor has changed to a plus sign. Once you have this plus sign, you will drag and decide how large the text box you want to have. Once this is done, you will right click on this text box, go to its properties, and in here, the option is linked cell. Here you will link the cell in which the data has to be typed, and then it has to appear in this embedded search bar. So in this case, I will link A1 cell, which is this one right here. Once I've done this, I am going to do something really amazing now. And that is, number one, first of all, exit out of the design mode. Then I'm going to go to home and I'm going to use conditional formatting in order to create the search bar. Usually search bar can also be created using the filter function, but in this case, I'm going to keep it really simple for you. So the very first thing is you select the data which you want to be searched for. Once you have selected the data, now we will go to conditional formatting, go to new rule. Now new rule actually helps you create different type of rules, novel or unique worksheets. So for that, I'm going to select the last option which says use a formula to determine which cells to format. Here, I'm going to add equals to, type in search, open bracket, and here I'll add the cell reference which I want to link with my text box, the search box. In this case, when I coded or when I went to the properties of the search bar, I had selected A1. So I'll select the same, followed by a comma. Now I will select only the headings of my data. In this case, the headings are the name and the date joined. Then I will remove the dollar signs which are behind the number, and instead of the colon, I'm going to add the and sign. And then I am going to ensure that my formula is closed. Move to format. In format, we will go to the tab of fill. In fill, we have different colors. You can select any one of them in order to color your particular row, which will highlight the name that you've searched in the search bar. So in order to make it more emphasizing, I will create a red search engine, you could call it, and click on OK. And once you do that, you're going to see that the whole data is colored red. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the name. Let's say I want to search Mr. Mark. And after doing that, I have to press on any cell. Once I do that, you're going to see the name Mark is highlighted as many times as it has appeared. Let me give it another try. I'll type Gibbs. Once I do that, you're going to see wherever the name of Gibbs will be, it will be highlighted. Let's have a third try to be sure. Jacob. And that's how you can see that in the whole list, Jacob, wherever it is present, it is highlighted. Now, can you see that there is this name repeating in the reference cell too? This looks a pretty odd thing in front of us. So what we simply can do is go to the option of font and simply color it white so that the reference cell does not show the data which is coded at the back. So that's how you can simply, easily create a search bar which can effortlessly search any sort of data instantly. Remember, most of the times what happens is when we create a search bar and we enter, let's say, the name Ben, and we are pressing enter, nothing happens. Remember, right here the search bar is selected. You can click on any cell at any random place inside your Excel sheet, and that certain function, that certain formatting will take its part. It will start functioning really well. So that was all how to insert search bar in Excel and effortlessly find out the names, find out the content which you want. In this case, what we can really do here is that we can search capital letters, we can search small letters, small caps, anything can work. So you don't have to worry of specifically typing in capital or small letters, because if Instead of search bar, I was using the find function, and I'll have to take a lot of care of the capitalization, if it is in sentence form, if it is in caps lock, lowercase. I don't need to worry about that in search bar. I can simply go just type and find that particular name. That was all for this lesson. I hope it was really helpful. I was really excited creating this lesson for you people. Hi there everyone, and welcome back to another lesson. In this video, we will be learning how we can add spin buttons in data tables in Excel. The very first thing is that spin buttons do look fancy, but they have a lot of utility in terms of adding units to your product sold or in any sort of data tables where you want them. Adding spin buttons is really easy, and let's get into directly how to add spin buttons and make your tables look fantastic. First off, you're going to go to the cell where you want the spin button to be added. Once you're there, you're going to go to the developer section from the ribbon, go to the control section and insert the spin button, which in other words is called the form control. Once you click on it, it will allow you to draw as large or as small spin button you want. Once that's done, you're supposed to drag it down for rest of the column. As soon as you're going to click on the top and the bottom arrows, you're going to find out that there is no change in the values and they're not working. That's because they are not linked to any cell where the information or the data is changing. In order to connect that, you're going to right-click on this image of spin button, and then after right-clicking, there's an option of Format Control. Once you click on it, it asks you that which cell would you like to link in order to control the spin button. In this case, you're going to select the cell which has the product value, because we want to control the number of product using the spin button and see how the product cost and the total revenue changes. Once that's done, you click on OK. Now when I start to use this button, by increasing the unit, you can see as the unit is increasing, so is the total revenue, but the product cost remains the same. Same way, you have to individually code each of the spin button for each of the data in each row. And that is how you can add the spin buttons in data tables in Excel and use them effectively in order to manage data. Thank you very much. See you in the next lesson.
Hi there everyone, and welcome back to another lesson. This video is really going to help you out in order to learn how we can use ChatGPT to create such formulas, such macros, VBAs, and Excel formulas which help us use Excel efficiently. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to find out the difference between these two things, which are macros and VBA differences. Now, it's very important that before using any particular function on anything in Excel, you get to know that what each word or terminology means. So once I Google it, you're going to see that ChatGPT is going to give me exact definition of what a macro is and what's a VBA. So right here, a macro is basically a sequence of instruction that automates tasks in software applications. In this case, we're using it particularly for Excel. And VBA is basically Visual Basics for Application. It's basically a programming language developed in Microsoft that is built into most Microsoft Office applications, and one of them is going to be Excel. Right here, I'm going to show you a scenario in which I have 3 different problems and I need to get through them in order to create some VBAs or macros or Excel formula, whatever is necessary. Right now, my very first question that I would like to ask Mr. ChatGPT is going to be a scenario in which I have to separate my first and last name. Now, you do not have to struggle looking for a formula or generating one on your own in Excel. You can simply give it a prompt. Let's say, I want to separate first and the last name in Excel sheet, please generate a formula for Excel for me. Now, once I give a go to this message, I'm going to see how magically it's going to create different formulas, not even one. So it gives you a lot of leverage on using different sort of functions you have. In this case, it told us that if you have a full name in a single cell and you want to separate the first and last name, then you can use a combination of text functions. Now you particularly know where to look at. So here it has given us a left and a right function. So we can use them simply. You just have to copy the formula from here, go back, select your data, and add it up there. Now, we're going to look at a specific situation where we will use a certain macro in order to find out how we can create a certain set of instructions which help us resolve problems. So I would say create a macro for me for sifting out the duplicates from an Excel sheet and putting them in a separate sheet. Now, what I want is I want to create a macro for sifting out the duplicates. Let's say I have a lot of data which has duplicate names, duplicate dates, but I want them to be sifted out. I only want that particular data which is required, which is non-duplicated, which has different values and different names only. And I want to exactly know that who is that sort of employee or the person who is actually resulting in duplicates, so I can use a simple macro. Now, it's going to generate the macro for us right here. And this macro has to be added into the code for that particular sheet. Let's see how to do that. The most amazing thing about ChatGPT is that it actually gives you instructions about how to run. For example, it says here below is a simple VBA macro. We already know what is VBA from the top. VBA stands for Visual Basics for Applications. So it's a programming language we're using right now to create some automated system which will not have us doing a lot of hard work on our own. So here we have the simple VBA code that we simply have to copy from here and we have to paste and run it. But before that, you can see ChatGPT has given us particular instructions. For example, it says to make sure to back up your Excel files so that they are not deleted. The next step, it says that you have to open the Excel file and press Alt F11 to open up the Visual Basics for Application. Now, these instructions are really important, and if they're not paid heed to, you're going to get reference invalid or any sort of error that is probably going to come if you are not going to put the VBA code at the right place. And if there are some extra spaces, it's going to cause problems. So this is how you can use Mr. ChatGPT to simply produce your code. You're going to copy it, you're going to add it. There are many videos and there is a lot of data that you can use from YouTube and other things as well, how to generate these codes. But there is a lot of margin of error because you are copy pasting stuff, you are typing things manually yourself too. So ChatGPT simply gives you one click away copied VBA codes, which you can add, and you can simply use them in order to create simple running programs in Microsoft Excel. I hope this video proved helpful. There is a lot more you can do with Excel depending upon your novel situation, your novel problem, or the type of data you have. And I'm hopeful that this video would help you out, get out of these problems really easily and quickly. Thank you very much.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.